Alan Wake 2 is one of the best looking games to come out in recent time, with a very transformative implementation of ray tracing. Since we recently got a brand new expansion, the Lakehouse, I wanted to examine the difference in image quality that ray tracing makes. Now, while the purpose of this video is image quality focused, we will also take a look at the performance cost at the end of this video by looking at a couple different GPUs. The chapters will be labeled. We're going to examine some of the areas in this expansion, but I found that in the outdoor areas, which is actually just the very beginning, the differences are not massive between having ray tracing off and on. Mostly it's in the shadows, but you can also see it in reflective materials as well, like this van, for example. You see the biggest differences in its reflections. With the ray tracing enabled, you see the forest behind be reflected, the lighting as well in the rims, and more accurate shadows. But let's go ahead and move inside, because that is where it's the most noticeable. The stainless steel hydraulic elevator in the main lobby as soon as you enter the Lakehouse is what immediately catches your eye, and you have to use it to make your way further down into the levels. And even without ray tracing, the reflections actually look really nice on the stainless steel, but turn ray tracing on and it takes it to another level. We can not only see our character, but even the stairs behind us. Additionally, you also get a lot more accurate reflections on the floor as well. But let's make our way inside the elevator. This game on Control, which interestingly enough is made by the same developer and takes place in the same universe, it just kind of lends itself well to the enhancements that ray tracing can bring. I mean, if you look at this beautiful stainless steel office building elevator, even without enabling any ray tracing, it actually looks really good. The reflections look pretty good enough, but you enable ray tracing, it takes it to a whole other level. The way the reflections bend around each panel, the bumper guards and the way they reflect behind them, or the button cover with a more matte finish, it's very accurate and highlights the difference in material. This game is one of the games where ray tracing makes a massive difference. It really does, and it was built with that in mind. We usually don't see this type of care in most games, I would say. But this one is a good example of how the technology can take things up to 11 or 12 or 13, right? It looks absolutely great. I want to take a quick minute and look at this desk. It's not something that you'd really spend that much time thinking about. Looking at the shadows, they look rather soft, but let's go ahead and turn ray tracing on. Instead of getting uniformly soft shadows for everything, you now get more accurate shadow casting. It's sharper when the object is closest to the surface where the shadow is being cast, and softer when it's farthest. And if you look at the chair, you can clearly see the direction of the light and where it's coming from. Funny enough, enabling ray tracing introduced some sort of a glitch on the file holder and the lamp, but I didn't really see that anywhere else. But ignoring that, you also get better reflections on the desktop, the metals, and the boxes. You get proper shadows and occlusion where the binders are. Actually makes it look a lot more realistic. That's something that you may not pick on immediately, but it is something that your eye recognizes as being more accurate, which can add to the immersion, absolutely. Again, it all depends on the type of setting the game is going for. I absolutely love this office with the big windows, and the way lighting and reflections work can add so much to a scene. For example, this looks quite spacious. And if you look out into the atrium, you can sort of see the mountains behind you and the big open windows. It looks really, really nice. But if we disable ray tracing, while still looking great, it sort of takes away from that wow factor. You know what I mean? And again, the reflections that we're able to see now is actually, they're using some type of a lumen type of technology. So there is still some software ray tracing happening, but it's way, way less detailed and actually quite noisy. And you're going to see this kind of become a bit more of an issue as we go into the darker levels. The graphics in this game are absolutely stunning. Like if we take a look at this security office right here, for example, it looks absolutely great. and then enabling ray tracing or path tracing just takes it to a whole other level in my opinion by making the shadows look a lot more realistic, but also the reflections add a lot to the scene. But let's make our way down to the darker areas because it can be quite interesting. Now, as soon as you make your way down one level below, you're met here with a big open hallway. You can see quite a lot of lighting and things be reflected on the floor. Even without ray tracing, it looks all right. But you flick ray tracing on and you just see how much detail is lost. Without it, you can see so much more. And even the elevator, which is pretty dark, actually quite a lot more detail is added because the more accurate reflections and shadows and lighting. Now, speaking of reflections, you do actually get a screen space layer on top without the ray tracing, which does a pretty decent job actually for static objects. But then again, you enable hardware ray tracing on and it takes it to another level, making the different surfaces a lot more realistic and about what you would expect to see. Now, as far as dynamic objects like this enemy here, without ray tracing, you can still see their reflections via the screen space to some extent, although not that accurate. But with ray tracing enabled, it's a lot more clear. It essentially mimics exactly what the enemy's doing. Some of these low light environments can also offer some pretty interesting detail here. So yeah, without ray tracing, it looks atmospheric enough, no doubt, but you enable it and it takes reflections and light bounce to a whole other level actually. This interesting looking ham radio type of equipment caught my eye on the right here with the knobs. Without ray tracing, it looks fine enough, but you enable ray tracing, and now you can see the ambient occlusion between the surface and below the legs of the equipment, the hot plate too actually, but also we now have shadows cast behind it because the light source is in the front. Other somewhat similar low lighting examples include this one. Without ray tracing, you can see in the reflections we actually have quite a bit of noise because again, I think they're using that software level ray tracing and the denoising is poor. But you enable ray tracing, now you can see perfectly accurate reflections coming from the other room. But there's also no noise, especially with ray reconstruction. It actually cleans up the quality quite a lot. Now, if we look up, you can see again that the reflection of the lighting in the ceiling is a bit noisy, but enable ray tracing cleans up nicely, but also the ceiling grid, which is made out of a sheet metal type of material, reflects the lighting as you would expect it to. Then you have the other four tiles that kind of reflect differently. They're a little bit brighter. That's because those are fluorescent light tile covers, and they're made out of a plastic that's supposed to dissipate the lighting a bit more evenly, whereas the ceiling tiles themselves are made out of an acoustic material that would not be as reflective. I've worked in buildings like this quite a bit actually, so this is very accurate. Definitely adds to the immersion. Another good example is this office around the corner, which only has one light on. This looks like night mode lighting in an office building essentially. If we look at the bookshelf there in the back, and let's go ahead and turn on ray tracing, now you get very accurate shadows cast from the light. And because the shelves are so close to the surface where the shadows being cast, the shadows themselves are actually quite sharp, as you would expect them to be. If we shift our attention to the desktop, you get more accurate reflections, shadows, and ambient occlusion. The attention to detail is absolutely insane. Even if we were to zoom into the desk and look at these balls, I forget exactly what they're called, but without ray tracing, they look fine enough. But then you enable ray tracing, they actually have very accurate reflections. You can see the door behind if you zoom in far enough, but you also see very accurate shadow casting actually. You can even see the two rails on the top shadow being cast. It's really that accurate. Very interesting. Let's go ahead and look at our last example, and this was cool because I saw this projector being reflected on the window as I was coming in here, and I just found that to be quite immersive just because how dark it is in here and you don't know what's coming because you haven't really encountered many enemies, but the reflection of this projector on the screen was to me insanely impressive actually. You could literally watch it on the reflection if you wanted to. It's that good. It's so well done. Even if you were to move in front of it and then go on photo mode, you can actually see yourself blocking the projector and your shadow in the front, including your character, actually on the Windows reflection. That was pretty cool. If you have ray tracing off, you can actually see a bit of a reflection on the window, although you can't really make out exactly what's happening. It does have some movement. Then you enable ray tracing and it looks extremely clean and crisp. Like I said, you could literally watch the whole thing on the reflection, which I find to be really cool and immersive because I was coming from down the hallway and the reflection was the first thing that I saw. So it really stood out to me. But here it is, side by side, ray tracing off on the top and ray tracing maxed out on the bottom. Now, before we dive into the performance numbers, the footage that you've been watching so far was captured on an RTX 4090, which is a very high-end GPU, very expensive. But what type of hardware do you need to run this ray tracing? Could you run it on an AMD GPU? Well, that's what we're going to take a look at. We're going to compare a few different GPUs and just come up with a conclusion. Let's take a look at the RTX 4090 first. So this is the game running at 3440 by 1440 ultra wide, so 5 million pixels with DLSS set to quality and all the settings maxed out except for the ray tracing. The ray tracing is off completely. Now, the image quality comparisons you saw were made with ray tracing maxed out, but you can actually go to low ray tracing preset. There's a medium and a high. If we go to low, actually still looks really nice. We went from 170 to 120. And yeah, you do get a bit noisier look and the reflections are not as high resolution, but there's still a much bigger improvement than not having any ray tracing at all, as you can see. And if we go to the medium ray tracing preset, we go from 120 to 105 FPS. The reflections are now cleaned up a bit more. It's not as noisy. Definitely a raise in image quality, absolutely, and a little bit more performance cost. I think I would probably recommend the medium, might be the more well-rounded option. And if we go to the high preset now, so now everything is maxed out, we're actually very close to what it was with the medium preset, so 100 FPS. And this is without any frame generation, by the way. Well, let's take a look at the RTX 3080 Ti next. Now, why the 3080 Ti? Well, this is just stuff that I personally own. I don't get anything sent to me, so I'm limited in what I can use to compare. But a 3080 Ti is very similar to a 3080 or 3090, 4070 or 4070 Super. So you're looking at that level of performance here. I will test the same exact area on the 3080 Ti, except we're actually checking out 2560 by 1440 this time. That's 3.7 million pixels. The 4090 was running ultra wide. This is running regular 1440, and without ray tracing on, everything else maxed out and DLSS quality, we get around 130 FPS. As you can see, the reflections don't look great. We got quite a bit of noise. But if we go ahead and throw on ray tracing to low, because a lot of people think that you need, you can't use ray tracing unless you have a 4090 or 4080. That is a lie. That is not true. So right now with ray tracing set to the low preset, we're at around 90 FPS on the 3080 Ti. As you can see, the reflections cleaned up quite a bit and is not as noisy. But I think we can do much better than that. So again, DLSS quality 2560 by 1440, ray tracing preset set to medium. And we're getting similar FPS. It looks a bit cleaner, not too bad. But let's go ahead and max out the ray tracing. That's kind of what I would want to play it at, but that's how I've been playing it actually. And let's check it out. High ray tracing. So that maxes everything out. You got ray reconstruction and everything else. And that takes us to around 80 FPS. Now, since we're very close to an enemy encounter, let's check that out with the high ray tracing preset and see how the performance, because sometimes there are areas that are a little bit more demanding and less demanding, but overall we appear to be staying above 60 FPS. We got quite a bunch of enemies, beautiful reflections on the floor as you can see, which wouldn't look as good with ray tracing turned off, of course. But yeah, 3080 Ti does really well here. Again, around a 4070 super level of performance is what you're looking at here. Although I suspect the RTX 4000 probably has an advantage due to shader execution reordering, which 3080 does not support. Next and last GPU, I have an AMD RX 7900 XTX. Well, let's give it a try and see how it does. We use same exact settings as the 3080 Ti. And here we are, guys, on the 7900 XTX. As you can see, we don't have access to DLSS or ray reconstruction. FSR2 is not a great implementation here either. Actually, it looks quite a bit ghosty and a bit messy, if I'm being honest. But we're going to use the same exact settings, and we're getting really nice frame rate, actually 200 FPS. So let's go ahead and try throwing on low ray tracing preset. It's going to take a little bit to kick on, and there it goes. We took a little bit of a hit to our frame rate, but not bad. 116 FPS with FSR quality. Again, not having ray reconstruction and FSR leads to a messier picture, unfortunately, which we're actually going to take a little bit more of a deeper look in a little bit. But let's go ahead and try the medium preset. I mean, frame rate wise, we're not doing too bad at all. 80 FPS. Again, if you look at the flies on the right there near the light, you can see a little bit of ghosting, but it's not too bad. I mean, it still looks all right. I think if we had a better implementation of FSR, it has the potential to look pretty decent. And with the high graphical preset, high ray tracing, everything maxed out, we're at around 67, 65 FPS. So just a little bit below the 3080 Ti with the ray tracing here. But other than that, it looks all right. Actually, not bad at all. But again, it does look a bit noisy. But let's take a look at the combat section, because that one is actually a bit interesting. I guess in some ways, this kind of goes to show just how good of a job that DLSS ray reconstruction and DLSS does in this game. But again, I don't really like the FSR implementation in this game. I think it could be better. And here we hit a little bit of a stutter. But if you look at the reflections, actually, they look a bit muddier and a bit more ghosty. And I think it's because we lack DLSS ray reconstruction. Other than that, well, we're right at 60 FPS with the 7900 XTX here. So not too bad. 3080 Ti is a little bit ahead, but let's put them side by side. 7900 XTX on the left, 3080 Ti on the right, and let's look at the reflections. Well, 3080 Ti is actually quite a bit ahead on the frame rate here. Again, it is an Nvidia sponsored title, but it goes to show how that DLSS ray reconstruction and probably the poor implementation of FSR here leads to much cleaner reflections on the 3080 Ti, even though the settings are exactly the same on both GPUs at 1440p. But leave a comment down below. What do you guys think? But I think that's going to be it for this video, guys. Just to share my thoughts. If you follow my channel at all, you know that I am a fan of ray tracing. Even back when I only had a 6800 XT back in 2020, I used to always like checking out ray tracing and making videos about it because I enjoy the technology. I find it adds to the immersion, and Alan Wake 2 is probably one of the best examples of that. Obviously, the type of game matters, because if you're going for a more realistic approach, a more atmospheric approach, ray tracing has a lot of potential, right? It's a lot more accurate, and it can make things look a lot more natural. Your eye expects things to look a certain way because we've gotten used to how light and reflections behave. So ray tracing adds that layer of immersion, in my opinion, anyway. And as far as whether it's worth it, well, you're going to get different answers from everybody, and no one is wrong necessarily. It all depends on your preferences, but it also depends on the type of hardware that you have. If you have hardware where you turn on ray tracing and your frame rate collapses, well, sure, you're not going to think that's worth it. Obviously, it makes sense, but I think ray tracing is becoming more attainable for everybody with faster and faster hardware. As you saw here, this is the best type of ray tracing you can experience, path tracing, and even with the 3080 Ti, we were able to do it no problem. That's not really a high-end GPU anymore, and even the 7900 XTX actually can do it fairly well. If we had a little bit better upscaling, it would look a bit better. But that's going to be it. Leave your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you have a great one, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.